have to not just look at the law that's in place now and has been in place for hundreds of years, but look ahead, because there is an awful lot of life that is unregulated. For example, AI, self-driving cars. That's an area of law that, well, very much doesn't exist yet. How do we regulate a self-driving car? If a self-driving car hits somebody, who's responsible?
Pretty much what we see in the headlines at the moment. So, it might be the war in Ukraine. It might be the role of social media in, what is widely perceived to be as, polarizing public debate or spreading disinformation. Whether it's issues such as, ensuring that patients who've been treated in hospitals and so forth have their rights upheld and their right to have information disclosed to them prioritized rather than the doctor's view of that. Those sorts of questions that I suppose relate in one sense to the way in which new technology can sort of disrupt existing legal understandings. So it might be about malicious communications and so forth using communication technology, very different today in the age of social media from what it was 30 or 40 years ago. And also the idea that certain cultural shifts have happened as well around the prioritization of citizens' rights and patients' rights. So it could also be in the context of data protection as well as in the area of healthcare law. It might be in the way that conversations have opened up now in terms of breaking down of stigma and stereotypes about mental health. So we're just going through at the moment debates around the reform of the Mental Health Act, and I think that they've been fueled to a large extent by the fact that that isn't such a sort of a narrow question around psychiatry and so forth. It's people, service users of psychiatry are contributing to this process in a much more kind of open and democratic way than I think was the case previously. So I think it seems to me anyway that where we see developments in the headlines, so whether it's about technology, whether it's about the role of international law in armed conflict, whether it's about the effect all of the sort of changing culture with regard to rights has on all of us as citizens, there's some potential there for us as students of the law, as scholars of the law, practitioners of the law, not just in the narrow sense of being a legal professional, but someone who then uses the skills and knowledge and insight you gain during the law degree to be used in your career. There is something there, I think, to really push the boundaries of existing legal knowledge and understanding. And because law connects with all these different areas of life, for me, that's what makes it fascinating. I don't know whether that kind of also resonates with you in some way.
Well, from my own experience as a prosecutor, you're very much applying the law as it is, because you're looking at a crime when it was committed, what law was in place at that time. But now that I'm here, I've got the opportunity to look deeper into the issues that I found really interesting, cybercrime. We're seeing so much commentary at the moment about offences that are committed using social media, and I really feel positive that in my new role I can take that forward and potentially have an impact on reform. So that's one way that I'm going to try and use my own experience and take that forward.
I think it's so important to have those conversations, because a lot of the time people don't realise you don't need to be anything to do like in the legal sector to have these opinions or have a change and reform. I think in particular, I remember having these conversations when I was an undergraduate and we were speaking about mental health, and you don't realise that with kind of the younger you are, there's things that you need to kind of think about. There's things that you will know that the current law doesn't reflect. So with the advances of technology and cybercrime and the impacts that you can have on someone's mental health just from kind of like your phones, and the way that the law isn't designed at this moment to regulate those kind of things. Or even when we was doing family law, I remember speaking about how the law is based on old traditional ideas. Nowadays, families look very different to what families looked like before. And it's trying to incorporate all those things into the current law. And I think that's a thing with the generation moving forward. It's the kind of conversations that we're having. And that's not just from law students, it's conversations that start like when you're in school, when you're watching TV. And especially like with the kind of TV shows you watch, and particularly people who are in influence positions and the mental health they speak about being in that kind of spotlight. And it's like, where do the rules regulate on things like that? Where does kind of media's rules and the law on that regulate? How far can they go? Because it all has an impact.
I think as well, for anybody that's thinking of studying law, you have to not just look at the law that's in place now and has been in place for hundreds of years, but look ahead, because there is an awful lot of life that is unregulated. For example, AI, self-driving cars. That's an area of law that, well, very much doesn't exist yet. How do we regulate a self-driving car? If a self-driving car hits somebody, who's responsible? You know, there's a whole element of new law and new regulations that, you know, you could go on and work for a self-driving car company, writing the code or writing the regulations, writing your disclaimers, writing your policies. How is that going to play out in reality? You know, looking for the loophole, like I said earlier. But I think studying a law degree will prepare you for that sort of role moving forward. I think I can't name every area. There's probably areas that I don't even know about that will crop up in the next 5 years. And somebody somewhere is going to have to think about how one, that's regulated, two, how it's policed, and three, the remedy for it. And, you know, and like we said about teaching law that doesn't work, it very well may end up as a subject that's taught, this doesn't work, we need to reform it. So I think, and you will be prepared for those discussions, those negotiations when you study a law degree. I don't think there's any other degree that would prepare you better for it, really, to solve those sorts of problems in life. I don't know what.
I think the way that we study law has completely changed as well, because I was a student here 11, 12 years ago, and now that I'm back here as a lecturer, everything's online, all the lectures are recorded. I can't believe how many resources are now available just using my laptop. And I think there's this perception that if you come and study law, you'll be in the library looking at books that are dusty, and there is some of that sometimes, but there's, you know, a whole range of resources that we can access and we can use, and there's so much innovation there as well. I don't know if you found that, Sammy, you know, with using all the resources that are online, and do you find it easy to use? And
I don't find it easy to use necessarily, but just my personal preference, I just rather like have the textbook in front of me rather than, you know, reading it online.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I think it's easy to get into the book and feel comforted by having the book, but I don't know if you felt the same, that when you learn law now, certainly when I was doing it, it's not a memory test. There are more and more law exams and legal practice exams where you are allowed to have the book with you in the exam. I think it's important that it's not a memory test. You're not required to remember all 3,000 pages of the white book or something like that. It's like you said, with the technology, there's databases that you can research. And I think the best lawyer is one that would go and look up the procedure or the law when they need to see it. It's not about remembering it all the time. I think you've got to stay current because it's always changing. So I think having the databases and stuff like that and being able to know where to look is equally just as important as remembering it.
I've got to completely agree with that. I lived by work smart, not hard. And it's the fact that you do not need mountains of books. You do not need to memorize anything. It's all about kind of like the conversations that we're having. It's that way of thinking. You need to be able to think that way kind of on paper and portray it that way as well. So when you read something, or it's kind of like real based now. So there'll be a scenario, and it's a real based scenario that you would come across if it was a family divorcing, they've got numerous assets, there's children involved. What are you going to do? And then it's exams, even now, it's about kind of looking at the children, what's best for the children, dividing the assets, you know, who's in this position, who's in that position. And it's having that analytical thinking, and all you're doing is all of that you would say out loud, you're just putting it on paper. There's no memory tests anymore. Like you said, it's not about this law back 500 years ago. It's really advanced and it's all practical, and I think that's what we're moving towards, more practical element, is why the LPC is even changing to the SQE. And even I did the LPC, I've just recently done that, and even then it's moved to a more practical element. All the exams were open book, so it was more about finding the information you need and kind of making sure you're on top of, like, one of the things was tabbing. You need to be able to tab correctly. And I think I went through all of the tabs at WH Smith, but it's just tapping it correctly, knowing where to find something, but then putting your own application on everything. That is what they're testing you for, because that's a skill you need when you go into practice. When you come across a client, they will give you mountains of information, or when you start at a firm and they have a file, the file will contain mountains of information, and it's being able to take out the bits you need, take out the important aspects of that. And that works digitally as well, is what I've realised, is that now files are not just paper form, there's digital elements, and it's using the technology you've got. You don't need to kind of flick through pages. You can narrow down searches, you can look for the things you need, and it's being able to do that competently digitally as well as physically.